Working in law enforcement means that you witness a lot of weird, strange, and scary things. So let's take a look at some of these stories taken from people on the job. First up, we have the secret operation. Now, this online user said, "My dad spent 30 years as a cop in California, and he told me about a time when he got a call to a building alarm at about 1 a.m. and arrived to find that the building had indeed been broken into, but inside, everything looked as if the people working there just got up and left years ago. Phones and papers on desks, coffee pot and water cooler still on the counter, only everything was covered in a thick layer of dust." Yeah, that is suspicious. After a few minutes of checking out the scene, the owner of the property, a female dressed in business attire in the middle of the night mind you, arrived. She provided identification and everything checked out. She then promptly walked over to the nearest telephone in the building, picked it up, dialed a number and said, "We've been compromised," and hung up. She thanked my dad and said she'd take it from there. My dad's best guess was that it was a front for some kind of higher up government operation or maybe some corporate espionage. Now to this day, this story gives me chills. And yeah, what do you mean she said we've been compromised? I mean, what if it was aliens or something? That is just creepy. Next up is the disturbing crime. Okay, this detective told a disturbing story that I can't believe that he witnessed in real life. He said in 2004, Kevin Lee Graff, a homeless drifter in Hollywood, broke into the home of a 91-year-old one-time blacklisted writer, decapitated him, strung his head onto a belt through his mouth and out his windpipe, and carried the head to a neighbor's house and stabbed to death the neighbor while he was on the phone. Wow, that is a lot. The suspect then hacked up the doctor's body and left it out in the yard minus some body parts. That's the abbreviated version of what happened. The reality is much more gruesome than I could possibly describe. Anyways, it trumps just about anything else I could think of that I've encountered, and I've seen some seriously scary stuff in my career. Yeah, no, that sounds absolutely horrible. Moving on to the fire. This person said, "I was in a junior police academy and one of the cops told us about a call they got a while back. A wife and a husband had just recently gotten married and everything was fine and dandy. The husband and the wife wake up one day and go about their usual routine. The husband kisses the wife goodbye and heads off for work. Nothing strange, except the wife notices the husband left his glasses, which she knew he really needed for his work. So she tries calling him, but he doesn't pick up. So she decides to drop off his glasses to him. His work wasn't that far anyways. She gets in the car and heads off to his work, but as she's driving, she sees a car pulled off on a dirt road and recognizes it as her husband's car. So she pulls off the main road to see if it's her husband. Sure enough, she sees him standing off to the side of the road a bit. She gets out of the car and calls out his name. He turns his head to look at her, lights a match, and instantly engulfs in flames. The cops showed us a picture of his body on fire in the fetal position, all charred. They never found out why he did it. No note, no indication, nothing. Now that sounds extremely traumatic for everyone involved. Now let's talk about the faked death. This Reddit user said, "My mother was a detective who told me this one. An elderly man who hadn't seen his daughter in a year was reading the newspaper, and in one of the pictures he sees his daughter in the street. He hires a private investigator who finds her, they talk, and she recognizes him and the DNA matched out, etc. Here's the clincher though, the reason he hasn't seen his daughter in a year is because she passed away from leukemia. They dig up the corpse and discovered it's a man who had a heart attack and it's not his daughter. There's pics and medical records, and the girl in the photo has no recollection of a week before being diagnosed, but remembered for some reason that she wasn't allowed to contact the family. They never found out who the man was, found out where the girl had been, and the hospital has no records of the doctor who treated the girl." Now, this sounds like something that happened on Pretty Little Liars. Now we have the meal from the afterlife. This online user said, "It was my uncle who used to be a cop in Hong Kong. He was patrolling the street on his own and received a smell complaint call from an apartment building nearby. So he reached the location and met the person who made the complaint and found out where the smell was coming from. He rung the doorbell and a girl opened the door. The girl was young and my uncle was informed that there was only her and her grandma living in the apartment. My uncle walked into the apartment and noticed there was a freshly made meal. He went into the room where the smell was coming from and found the woman's body. My uncle was puzzled by the freshly made meal because the girl was not tall enough to reach the stove and countertop. When my uncle asked the girl who made this, she said it was her mother. Now later he found out that the girl's mother passed from a stroke about a week ago. Now did the ghost cook her dinner? What happened? That's literally so creepy. The funeral home story is next. This police officer said it was back in the mid to late 1990s. I was riding patrol on the midnight shift when I received a burglar alarm to a closed business. From my experience, this means that someone just tried to or successfully burglarize one of the businesses on my beat. When I arrived at the business was a funeral home. The door is unlocked and I can hear the alarm going off. My backup arrives to help secure the perimeter, and I call the K9 unit to respond. K9 officers arrives and sees that it is a funeral home, and he said he could not deploy his dog because the dog won't discriminate against an alive or dead person and would attack. I've got to go in and check this funeral home, open every casket, check every gurney, and make sure that no one is hiding in this funeral home. Now, just thinking about that creeps me out. They continued, my partner flatly refused to open anything that could contain a dead person. I told him I would do the checking and that he just needed to cover me. Room by room, casket by casket, I carefully lifted each lid and checked each coffin. Most were empty, but some were occupied. The ones that were occupied, I had to reach in and lightly touch the person to make sure that they were ice cold. If they weren't cold, they were a bad guy hiding in the coffin. Now at the end of it all, there was no bad guy and no burglary. Now you could not pay me any amount of money to do that because that just sounds so horrifying. On to Not So Innocent. This investigator said, meet Michael Focht. I received a call to a hotel location in my jurisdiction. Michael rented a room at the hotel and had one hell of a party. He wore a colostomy bag and was confined to a wheelchair. Sometime that evening, Michael had taken the contents of the colostomy bag and smeared them all over the room. Now, okay, first, gross, second, ew, and third, gross. Yeah, that part is absolutely terrifying, but that's not all. They continued by saying, fast forward about a year, Michael was arrested and convicted on 2 counts of homicide. Prior to being confined to the wheelchair, it was discovered Michael ended the life of his wife by suffocating her. The body was found in a 55-gallon drum buried beneath a concrete slab at his parents' residence. And it was also discovered that he ended the life of a girlfriend and buried the body in a 2-foot deep pit covered with gravel at an auto body shop. He was also suspected in the disappearance of a friend, and he is now serving a life sentence. Yeah, I would hope that he's serving a life sentence after all of that. Then there's the possessed man. This online user said, dispatch to a structure fire, a disturbance call, and a request for an ambulance at the same address. I arrived on the scene and found a crowd of people holding down a violent man, screaming at the top of his lungs, an elderly woman struck multiple times in the head with a hammer, and a fully engulfed house with fire rolling out the windows. I was able to quickly determine that the man was the elderly lady's son. He had attacked her with a hammer and set the house on fire as well. She was a lay pastor in one of the rural churches, and he had become a Satanist while in prison. I handcuffed the wild naked guy and had the neighbors hold him down until additional units arrived. Now the guy was scary. He was talking in 2 voices at the same time. I had him in the back of the police car and I knew he was alone. I was hearing 2 voices speaking at the same time. He would cry out for God to save him, and another deep, evil sounding voice would tell him to shut up, you weakling. I own your soul. The guy would scream out in remorse, and the evil voice kept telling him the deal was done. Now this arguing continued back and forth. As the man would call out to be saved, the voice would laugh. That is a big nope from me. Up next, we have Not a Prank. This online user said, as a probationary police constable, I was called to a rundown Victorian terraced house in the middle of the town where I worked. Some teens had broken in and gone down to the cellar and found a body in the freezer before fleeing in horror. They made an anonymous call from a phone box to police reporting what they had found, and initially it was treated as a hoax. Now, that being the case, and me being the most junior officer on the team, it was my job to go and have a look. On arrival, the street was dark and deserted, and I made my way into the house and down to the cellar. Unfortunately, the batteries in my flashlight were low, and I could only just make out where I was going. Against the back wall to the cellar, I could just about make out a large white chest freezer. I walked over, confident that there was nothing in there. I opened the lid and was hit by the smell of death. Laying wedged into the freezer was the body of a male who was obviously very dead. Yeah, now I can't imagine everyone thinking that this is a prank and then you're the one to stumble across a real dead body. And lastly, we have failed relationship. This Reddit user said, the strangest story I heard from a police officer colleague. A young woman's parents found her body in a chair at a dining room table where she shot herself in the head. There was a letter on the table from Steven Tyler saying he was breaking up with her. Turns out she had told her mother that she was in a new relationship with someone the past couple of months, but he lived far away, so they exchanged letters. At first, it was unexplained, and detectives thought someone had tricked her because she obviously wasn't dating Steven Tyler, but then detectives found a box of the letters, both the ones sent to her and the ones she sent to Steven Tyler, in a box in her room. All were addressed to her house, and they determined that they were all written by her, just in different handwriting. So essentially, she ended her own life after breaking up with herself through a letter. Now, that is incredibly unfortunate, as she obviously had some sort of mental illness, but it's crazy how much her delusions affected her. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 true detective stories that will terrify you. Which one on our list scares you the most? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I'm your host, Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.